Splendid. That's one way to get rid of the horrid thing.
There are some films that simply turn out perfect. And for me, one of those perfect films is the 1963 British film Mouse on the Moon. For me, it can be summed up with just one word.
Brilliant.
Now, from the average Rotten Tomatoes score ratings of 88% on the tomato meter and 52% on the popcornometer, and an IMDb rating review average of 6.3. This appears not to be a universal opinion. But this is my channel, and if I say it's perfect, then it's bloody well perfect. And if you're one of those aesthetically challenged subhumans who don't think this, please feel free to disagree in the comments section. The algorithm just loves a good Barney. Greetings and felicitations. I'm Mark Hempsell, an astronautical systems engineer who is looking at how films that depict space have generated a fantasy universe that I'm calling fairy space, yet this is currently what humanity thinks the real universe is like. So, Mouse on the Moon is one of my all-time personal favourite films. And as it's my channel and I get to decide what films get looked at, I'm going to say this is going to get its own video, where I can enthuse about how much I enjoy it, with the flimsy excuse that it happens to be a space film. I realise that many who have been following this channel will be surprised to learn that I love pedantry. And in that noble spirit, I would like to distinguish between great movies and perfect movies. Great movies are the masterpieces of the cinematic art. They're the ones that break boundaries, explore new avenues of storytelling and the possibilities that the audio-visual experience can offer. In reaching beyond convention, they often do not completely succeed, but they always have a lasting impression on the movie industry. They leave a legacy in subsequent films. They're the films you ought to see, even if you don't necessarily enjoy the experience. On the other hand, perfect movies are films you want to see, the ones you actually watch again and again. When you're snuggled up on the sofa with mild flu, it's a perfect movie that you will be watching to take you through it. Now, these are never groundbreaking. They're just movies where the script, cast, director and the rest of the crew just hit a sweet spot in conventional movie making to produce these perfect delights. They create story worlds that are easy and comfortable to slip into and escape the tribulations of life. Now, there are some perfect movies that I'm sure we can all agree upon. These are universally enjoyed and adored. They barely ever win Oscars, as their smooth execution that creates such an easy viewing experience hides the skill in their production. Note how often they're the product of the most talented in the film industry, and also how often they're comedies. But there will also be perfect films that will be personal to us, where the rest of humanity might not agree with us, but that movie just clicks with our individual quirks and perversions in a way that it doesn't for much of the rest of the human race. I have a few such favourites, and one of these is the 1963 American-financed but British-produced Mouse on the Moon that was occasionally shown on television in my youth. I loved it then, and I love it still. Mouse on the Moon is a sequel to the 1959 film The Mouse That Roared, which in turn was based on a novel by Leonard Wibberley. The basic story of The Mouse That Roared is that a microstate called Grand Fenwick declares war on the United States with the intention of losing, and thus getting the inevitable post-war largesse.
There isn't a more profitable undertaking for any country than to declare war on the United States and to be defeated. True. No sooner is the aggressor defeated than the Americans pour in food, machinery, clothing, technical aid, and lots of money for the relief of its former enemies.
This is clearly parodying the Marshall Plan, which helped fund post-war reconstruction of Western Europe. Grand Fenwick itself being a satirical parody of God's chosen nation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, with all the irreverent viciousness that only an Irishman living in an affluent seaside suburb of Los Angeles could conjure. The Mouse That Roared was financed by Columbia Pictures, but it was made in Britain as the producer Carl Foreman was an American in exile due to the Hollywood blacklist that were part of the McCarthy witch hunts. So the production team and cast were British, including Peter Sellers, who was the star, playing 3 roles. Sellers was very popular in the UK with his many outstanding performances in late 1950s British films, although at this time he was unknown in the States. But despite Peter Sellers' home box office draw, to everyone's surprise, the film bombed in British cinemas. And then, to everyone's even greater surprise, it was a smash hit in America. I guess they appreciated the savage mocking of Great Britain and missed the savage mocking of the USA. For the real heart of this movie's satire was the absurdity of a nuclear defence policy based on mutually assured destruction. An interesting, if irrelevant, fact is that The Mouse That Roared was the first film to make a joke on the distributor's logo at the start of a film. So, The Mouse That Roared ended up being a very financially successful movie for all concerned. And Leonard Wibberley rode the wave of this success with 5 further Grand Fenwick novels, indulging his stereotypical Irish hatred of the British while getting a generous financial return. Of these, the 3rd novel, entitled Mouse on the Moon, was turned into a sequel film. The novel was published in 1962, just after President Kennedy had kicked off the moon race. This time, the satire was directed at the use of the space race as a tool of foreign policy. It was almost immediately picked up for this sequel project. And we're now 3 years on from the first movie, so Peter Sellers is now a busy actor in mainstream Hollywood fare and was not available for his second film. From my perspective, this was a lucky circumstance, as it meant he was replaced by Margaret Rutherford as the Grand Duchess Gloriana XIII, Ron Moody took on Prime Minister Rupert Mountjoy, and Bernard Cribbins as the young male lead. Cribbins is adequate, but I think Rutherford and Moody are sublime, and for my money, better in the roles than Sellers. The large cast are mostly British stalwarts of the time. David Kossoff is Professor Kokins, who is the only returner from the first film, an actor who'd already acquired a taste for playing in space adventures, as he played Lemmy Barnett in the radio series Journey into Space. Another point of interest is Peter Sellers, who would later in life become the voice of Wallace in Wallace and Gromit. All those in the cast who could act put in solid performances, and those that couldn't do their entertaining party pieces with aplomb. And as a piece of trivia, Ed Bishop, who plays the captain of the American lunar spaceship, well, he was the Capcom in You Only Live Twice. He reprised his captain's role in 2001, and he was then promoted to Moon-Base Commander in the TV show UFO. The director, Richard Lester, pulls this wealth of talent together beautifully. And as I say, I watch it again and again. But I find it strange that a film which was made in Britain, with British stars who are not well known internationally, and is a parody of Britain's role in the world, is to all intents and purposes unobtainable in God's great nation itself. I had to purchase an American Region 1 DVD that will not play in Europe, and later a Spanish version. However, despite my affection for this little gem, it is ultimately a space movie. And therefore, it must be trashed for its inaccuracies, or my channel loses its purpose. Which means we must put the movie into its historical context. Gagarin had made the first human spaceflight, and President Kennedy had responded with the challenge of reaching the moon by the end of the decade. So the space race was highly topical for both the book and the film. However, this is a very different world from today. There were no GoPro cameras, mobile phones or practical video of any sort. Visual images required film cameras, which by spacecraft standards were large and heavy. So even though by the time the film was in production there had been several successful flights by both America and Russia, the only visual image available were the American launches. No images of Soviet launches and no usable images of orbital flight from anybody. Thus, when the movie shows a Soviet rocket gifted to Grand Fenwick to match the American gift of $1 million, it's completely wrong. But at the time, only the Soviet military and the CIA knew what the R-7 rocket really looked like. It was not until the Paris Air Show in 1967 did the Soviet Union reveal what the launch vehicle that they had used for all their achievements actually looked like. So you can hardly fault Mouse on the Moon for guessing and not getting it right. It is, however, a pretty good multi-stage rocket of an appropriate size. And when they show the rocket's interior, they have matched it to the dog launching cage that was used in Sputnik 2, and that had photos in the public domain. Although the hatch is clearly a silly size given the difficulty in getting through it with a spacesuit. Oh, sorry, I forgot. That bit is actually realistic. We are going to see this throughout the 1960s. Movie production designers draw from the pool of publicly available images, which are very sparse, to get their spacecraft designs. There is a wide range of other design concepts in technical literature, but these would need within-industry knowledge from a technical consultant, which by and large 1960s space movies did not use. So what results is a spacecraft that are based on NASA press releases, which is also the source for the newspapers and other media, which in turn are informing the general public, who are of course the movie's audiences. This means the movies of the time tend to match the contemporary audience perception of what a spacecraft should look like. Both the filmmaker and the audience are drawing their perception from the same limited resource. But that does not mean that they're using the right sort of spacecraft for the mission being shown, or indeed have any notion of the capability of the real spacecraft. However, in this regard, Mouse on the Moon is much better than most. The launches are stock footage of an Atlas rocket, the largest American rocket at the time, and they managed to find some footage of one of the few that didn't actually explode on launch. The lunar landers were from illustrations of the lunar lander concept that was in place while the decision was being made as to which strategy Apollo would use to reach the moon. By the time Mouse on the Moon was in production, the decision had been made to have a lunar module, and the contract was awarded to Grumman at Long Island, New York, and that had been awarded. But it was way too early to know even the outline of how the real lunar module would look. So this is as good as could have been expected, and it was a real concept for landing on the moon. The film's production team get around their complete ignorance of the Soviet equivalents by very obviously duplicating the American designs. But this just fits neatly into the movie's running joke about the Soviet Union and America being identical. And of course, we also get plenty of technobabble, mostly delivered by David Kossoff's Professor Kokins.
But, Professor, those would burn up before you reach Mach 2, let alone...
Yes, but we do not reach Mach 2.
Oh, come now, Professor. To reach escape velocity, which is,
25,000 miles an hour.
25,000 miles an hour.
We do not reach escape velocity.
Oh, come now. If you don't reach escape velocity, you don't escape the Earth.
Oh, yes, you do. Power, and not speed, is important. If you have sufficient power to overcome Earth's gravity, you can travel at any speed you like.
Now, much of Kokins' explanations are indeed the nonsense they sound, and thus, although he is acknowledged to be a scientific genius, within the story universe, the outside world can write off the potential of the Grand Fenwick moonship. But when it comes to the rocketry, it isn't nonsense. If you have enough power, you can indeed reach the moon without ever reaching orbital speeds. Further, overall, the film gives us enough information for us to do some sums. After the takeoff, the Americans do some analysis.
Speed, 450 miles per hour. Estimated time of lunar impact, September the 3rd at 0600 hours. The elapsed time of journey will have taken 3 weeks, 2 days, 3 hours, 27 minutes, and...
So we know the flight time is around 555 hours. And the speed is 450 miles per hour, which is the speed of the fastest World War II aircraft. From which we can conclude that they are reaching the moon at apogee, which is when it's furthest from the Earth. So it seems they knew their stuff back in 1963. But we can go further. As they are not accelerating, it means the rocket's thrust must equal the ship's weight due to gravity. The thrust is the exhaust velocity times the propellant mass flow rate. The mass of the rocket changes as the propellant is depleted, and the distance to Earth, of course, also changes, which reduces the gravitational force. If the exhaust velocity is a constant, to reduce the thrust, the mass flow must reduce. So to find c, we need to solve this integral equation. So the radius linearly decreases due to constant speed, and the mass decreases exponentially, so we need to... Oh, sod it, I'm going to do it numerically. I make it that the Grand Fennig Wine rocket has an exhaust velocity of around 300 kilometers a second. If we compare this with rockets that we can actually build in the real world, we see that it is considerably more than even low thrust electric propulsion. But it is not beyond the bounds of known physics. Now, if we know the thrust and we know the exhaust velocity, we know the power, and it's phenomenal, about 3 times the average power consumption of God's chosen people. I would point out that sound levels generated by a rocket are proportional to the exhaust velocity. So it will not have the gentle put that you can talk over as depicted in the film. With these levels of power, I doubt you would want to be this close to the launch.
Ah, well, 1 minute before she blasts off.
Aren't we a bit near if anything should go wrong?
Oh, Professor Cockins assures me that no harm will come to anyone out here when if anything should go wrong. Splendid.
The moon's surface is a pretty good effort for the time, and they make a better than average attempt to portray reduced lunar gravity. The fact that they are playing the Astronautics both straight and serious means that they can poke some fun at some of the sillier fairy space conventions. If you've seen my past videos, you know I'm particularly hard on the convention that rockets produce near death-inducing levels of acceleration. So here is Grand Fennig's take on the takeoff.
I'm not strapped in, Professor. I've seen films of astronauts on the blast off, and the gravitational pull is quite tremendous, and that G-force is building up and trying to push back. And away they go. Shoving the...
You take milk and sugar, don't you, Vincent?
Yes, sir. Professor, we're moving.
Yes.
And I love it. I think having this level of realism in the Astronautics provides one of the anchors for the satire. Successful satire has to have points where it is grounded, or it blunts the edge of the absurdity of the satirical elements. The conventional spacecraft of America are depicted as accurately as you could expect at the time without some specialist involvement. And the Grand Fennig moonship is a clever use of the unconventional to create believable skepticism in the story world, but grounded enough in real physics to make their confoundment credible. I don't know whether this clever balance was calculated and by design, or just a lucky accident, but the result works just so well. Okay. Judging from the reactions to some of my past videos, I'm going to get a lot of comments along the lines of, so why are you over-analysing what after all is intended as a satirical light comedy entertainment. And if you are thinking that, I would agree you have a point. However, my reason for doing this critique is to highlight that in this light satire, the Technobabble is capable of this level of mathematical analysis and passed with some aplomb. It opens up the question, if this medium budget British comedy can get it right, why can't the serious science fiction films meet the same standard? Mouse on the Moon even successfully challenges and makes fun of the more outrageous fairy space conventions, which is surely what the serious space films that are intended to be realistic should be doing. Now, of course, I am not suggesting that Mouse on the Moon is a visual feast of effects, taking the audience into a hyper-accurate world of real spaceflight. But it does go above and beyond what you would expect for the genre. And, of course, the movie does not stand or fall on the accuracy of its astronautics, but rather whether it is telling a good story and it is funny. With regards to story, the interaction of the events and how the characters respond to the climax of absurdity is a well-crafted story, so I would tick it in the good story box. As for humour, well, comedy fashions have changed in the last 60 years, and I'm not sure if a younger audience would find it as funny as it was at the time, or to decrepit survivors of those times like me. Some of the reviews on the internet suggest not. That said, I think it is not just hilarious for old fogies like me, brought up on this sort of comedy. The movie is more universal than that, and many more would enjoy it today if it were more available. And maybe, for a few more people, Mouse on the Moon would become one of their perfect movies.